if you want to follow Rick Barnes' philosophy, and that is Rick Barnes wants his team to fight through opposing runs, then this team had better learn that quickly, and they only have a month to be able to learn how to fight through opposing runs. The thing about it to me is, Caleb, it's surprising that they don't fight through that, as at times they've been incredibly scrappy. But now they just seem to roll over during runs and get frustrated and miss more shots. I just, this shouldn't be an immature team. This is an older team. This is an experienced team. But I feel like I pick on this guy way too much, Caleb. And I'm not saying he was the reason they lost last night or any of that. And let's remember they were still number 2 going into the game, so they've had a successful season to this point. There's no question, despite what happened last night. But I just think that a lot of times you look at the leader, and the leader is the point guard. In football, it's the quarterback, and I just don't know that Zakai Ziegler provides that consistent presence at that position. That's my number one concern, and to some extent, I think it's a bit of a root cause. I don't think they have a calming force at point guard. It reminds me a lot of Tony Harris back in the day, and I don't know how you fix that, to be quite honest with you, before March.
Yeah, it actually reminds me. I get your point with Tony Harris. One that it reminds me of was the first Tennessee team to ever win 30 games and reach number 1. That Chris Lofton senior year, 2007-2008, when they had Tyler Smith and Juwan Smith. They didn't have a point guard on that team either. Ramar Smith was the guy they tried, but Ramar was so much more of a slashing combo guard. Would have been a better fit in like Calipari's system than Bruce Pearl's system, honestly. And I remember their only true point guard was Jordan Howell, but he wasn't a starting point guard. He was a backup. And they got desperate in the postseason and tried to get JP Prince to step in at point guard for a minute. And they had so many issues because of that. And it didn't help that we know why now. Chris Lofton was not himself shooting from outside that year.
Right.
And so he was prone to off nights. Juwan Smith was prone to off nights too. Juwan Smith was always prone to an off night because he wasn't on Chris Lofton's level. So they go play Louisville, and it was one of those games where both of them were just off shooting the ball, and Louisville has that really complicated 1-3-1 zone, and Tennessee did not have, or a matchup zone, excuse me. And Tennessee didn't have a point guard that could break it. And that's why they got blown out in that game. And you're right. If someone throws in, say a team does get red hot shooting the ball in March Madness, and then they throw in a complicated matchup zone against the Vols on the other side, do you really trust the guy Ziegler to break that and figure it out? Because I don't.
No, I don't either. And the question is, can this be fixed by March? You've already stated, I believe pretty definitively, that it can't be, and Tennessee's not a Final Four team. I'm always of the mindset that yes, teams can get hot, teams can get cold in the games leading up to March and leading up to March Madness. I believe that yes, they could still pull things together and make the Final Four. Just like I think there are a lot of great teams out there that could fall apart, like them. I think a lot of things can change in the last half of February. I've seen it firsthand. But, at this point, it's pretty tough to make the argument that they look like a Final Four team or even close last night.
Yeah, I agree. And they have a big – Jimmy Hyams, to his credit, actually broke this down in the article he wrote the other day. I called him out a little bit because I felt he ignored the three-point shooting issue that comes and goes. But he said that there is a take that Rick Barnes grinds his team so hard during the season because he's so obsessed with toughness that they kind of get a little mentally drained by the time March comes. I don't know if that's true or not, but it seems like you see that. It seems like they're grinding so hard through games, and then comes a game where they're just mentally drained and they have to take that night off because of it. And that was last night. And I worry for Tennessee's sake that.
Okay, I get that. But how can you take a night off when you're playing Florida, which is arguably in basketball your second biggest rival? But for those that don't know the history of the 2000s, there was a lot of bad blood there. Maybe these kids don't. But, other than Kentucky, going in, it's the toughest place to play, right? And it may be tougher. It has been tougher at times, I would argue. I just don't. If you show up flat to South Carolina or Mississippi State or another team. Anybody basically, I understand if you show up flat to other than Kentucky because they're Kentucky, Florida because you're at Florida and you better have your gumption ready to go, and then Alabama because they're really, really good. Other than those three teams, you have I can understand showing up flat, maybe eking out a win, maybe getting beat on the road, especially. But those three teams, Caleb, how do you show up flat for those three teams?
Yeah, no, you're right. That's a great question. But I mean, I would say this group of kids doesn't remember the Billy Donovan era probably at all.
Yeah,
Florida, and that probably is where that comes from. But you're right. To a certain degree, you're right. They should have been up. It wasn't. At least with Kentucky, you could have said a Saturday noon game where you're just, this was a Wednesday night game. They had plenty of rest from Saturday's win over Texas. And that's the other thing. Can this team handle success? Every time they're flirting with the number one ranking, the last two times they've done it, this happens. I've said if March Madness were a run like the NBA playoffs, best of 7 series all the way, I have no doubt Tennessee could win it all. I have no doubt. But the problem, as we know with March Madness, is it's not a best of 7 series each way. It's a win or go home. And I don't see Tennessee as a team capable of winning 6 straight against NCAA caliber tournament teams, all of them. And that's what they'll be running into. And I just think that, look, there's a reason that Barnes has only made the second weekend of the tournament once since, I think, 2008. I'll say this much for Barnes. And if you want your kid to be developed for the NBA, there is no better coach in college basketball, quite honestly. I think that Rick Barnes is the coach that could take a bunch of 3-stars or 2-star recruits, and if they stay in the system for 2 or 3 years, by year 3, they'll be flirting with the number 1 ranking because he develops them that well. But if you want a guy that's going to look at a player's talent and draw the perfect X's and O's scheme for them to put them in the best position, you're not always going to get that. Similar to somewhat, maybe, dare I say David Cutcliffe in football, or was David Cutcliffe, to me, David Cutcliffe was a better developer of talent than he was just X's and O's game planning week to week. I felt like if you went to play for David Cutcliffe, he was going to have you ready for the NFL in 3 years.
Yes, I don't. That's a very interesting question. I would say this. Now you have the ability to do more RPO because I don't want to get too complicated because I feel like maybe some of this is lost on those that don't really watch the offensive line. But you're allowed to release offensive linemen further downfield in passing situations. So that wasn't allowed back then. I mean, they can be 5 yards downfield and they're essentially blocking and shielding for what's an RPO and a potential pass play. So I don't think that was available in the 90s. So I don't think there was a lot of out scheming going on in general. I think it was either your pro style or you are running like the wishbone like Nebraska. So I don't think that option was out there. I don't think David would have accepted it, quite frankly. I don't think he would have liked it anyway. But I don't think he really had that option. So that came about over the past, 7-8 years, and we've seen Josh Heupel and other coaches be very successful with that. But that's a great question. I do think that he put his players in the NFL. They had great success. What was he the 100% best scheme coach at the time? I don't know, but I look back at that 90s period and even 2000s, and I don't know that there was a guy that just blew you away with scheme. Can you think of one off the top of your head?
I mean, I would have said Spurrier, but you're right.
Okay. Yeah, well, there was that one. Yeah, I mean,
Hal Mummy with the air raid when he came in, but yeah, you're right. Like, it was outside. You're right. It was mostly the wishbone, or there were no RPOs.
Yeah, Hal Mummy would have been successful, I believe, if he hadn't have made. He was aggressive, and if he hadn't made the dumb decisions in terms of fourth down, in terms of game management. That's what undermined him a lot of games. I still remember the first quarter when he went forward and 4th and 17 at his own 35 in Neyland Stadium. And I'm like, what the is going on? I mean, I may be exaggerating by a couple of yards, but not a lot.